Queen Zarathul stood at the massive viewing window of her flagship, watching the blue-green planet called Earth slowly rotate beneath her fleet. Her 4 arms crossed behind her back, the crystalline formations on her violet skin catching the light of the alien star. For 3 cycles, her people had studied this world and its strange inhabitants. The humans fascinated her in ways she couldn't explain. The Veltar Empire had conquered 17 star systems, each filled with species that bowed before their superior technology and psychic abilities. But Earth was different. These humans possessed something her scientists couldn't measure or understand. They called it determination, courage, or simply stubbornness. Whatever it was, it made them dangerous. "My queen," her chief advisor Kethron approached, his own crystalline skin shifting from blue to worried purple. "The human delegation has arrived. They request an audience." Zarathul turned from the window, her golden eyes reflecting centuries of rule. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her elongated form both elegant and intimidating. The crown of living crystal that grew from her skull pulsed with soft light, indicating her royal bloodline. "Bring them to the throne chamber. I will see what these creatures have to say." The throne chamber was a masterpiece of Veltar architecture. Walls of flowing metal seemed to breathe with life, while floating platforms provided seating for her court. At the center, her throne rose like a crystal tree, its branches holding orbs of concentrated psychic energy. 3 humans entered, escorted by her guards. Zarathul had expected them to cower like every other species when faced with her presence. Instead, they walked with heads held high, their eyes meeting hers without fear. The lead human, a tall male with graying hair at his temples, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, offering a slight bow. "I am Ambassador David Chen, representing the United Earth Coalition. These are my colleagues, Dr. Sarah Martinez and Captain James Morrison." Zarathul studied them carefully. The ambassador's voice carried no tremor of fear. The female scientist's eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than terror. The military officer stood at attention, ready for anything. Such strange beings. "Humans," she spoke, her voice carrying the harmonic frequencies of her people. "You stand before the ruler of 17 star systems. Your world has been marked for integration into my empire. Surrender now, and your people will be treated fairly." Ambassador Chen stepped closer, completely ignoring the threatening hisses from her guards. "Your Majesty, we come not to surrender, but to propose an alternative." The court erupted in shocked whispers. No species had ever dared such boldness. Zarathul raised one of her 4 hands, and silence fell instantly. "Speak!" "We propose a cultural exchange," Chen continued. "Allow some of our people to live among yours, and some of yours to experience human society. Let understanding replace conquest." Zarathul's advisor Kethron stepped forward angrily. "Majesty, this is ridiculous. We are the superior species. We do not need to understand these primitives." But something in the human's words intrigued her. In all her conquests, she had never considered trying to understand her subjects. They were simply resources to be managed. "And what would prevent me from simply taking what I want?" she asked. Captain Morrison spoke for the first time. "Because, Your Majesty, taking something and truly possessing it are 2 different things. You could conquer our bodies, but you'd never touch our spirits." The word spirits sparked something in Zarathul's mind. Her people had lost much of their spiritual connection generations ago, focusing instead on psychic power and technological advancement. Yet these humans spoke of spirits as if they were real, tangible things. "You intrigue me," she admitted. "Very well. I will consider this exchange, but first you will remain as my guests while I deliberate." Over the following days, Zarathul found herself drawn to observe the humans. Unlike her usual prisoners who sat in defeated silence, these three explored their quarters, asked endless questions of their guards, and somehow managed to make even her most serious warriors smile. Dr. Martinez proved particularly fascinating. The scientist showed genuine excitement about Veltar technology, but not in a way that suggested she wanted to steal it. Instead, she seemed to appreciate the beauty and elegance of their achievements. She even suggested improvements to some of their designs, ideas that made Zarathul's engineers scratch their heads in amazement. But it was Ambassador Chen who affected her most profoundly. During their evening conversations, he spoke of human concepts she had never encountered. He talked about love not as weakness, but as strength. About sacrifice not as defeat, but as victory. About hope as a force more powerful than any weapon. "Your Majesty," he said during one such conversation, "may I ask you something personal?" They sat in her private garden, a space filled with crystalline plants that sang softly in harmonious frequencies. Zarathul had never allowed any non-Veltar into this sacred space before, yet somehow it felt right to have him there. "You may ask, in all your conquests, have you ever found happiness?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Happiness? She was the most powerful being in 17 star systems. She commanded technology that could reshape worlds. Her psychic abilities could crush minds across vast distances. What did happiness have to do with anything? "I am fulfilled by my achievements," she said carefully. Chen nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "Achievement and happiness aren't always the same thing. I've seen your people, Your Majesty. They're incredibly advanced, incredibly capable, but I haven't seen any of them laugh." Laugh? Express joy, spontaneous pleasure, the simple delight of being alive. As if to demonstrate, Dr. Martinez's laughter echoed from somewhere in the ship. She had apparently discovered something amusing in the laboratory where Zarathul had allowed her to work. The sound was unlike anything Zarathul had ever heard from her own people. It was infectious. She found herself wanting to smile, though she couldn't understand why. That night, alone in her chambers, Zarathul stood before her mirror. Her reflection showed a being of terrible beauty and awesome power. But Chen's words echoed in her mind. When had she last felt joy? When had any of her people? She thought of the conquered worlds, the species that now served her empire. They went through the motions of life, but was there any happiness there? Had her rule brought order and peace, or had it simply created a galaxy-wide prison? The next morning brought disturbing news. A rebellion had broken out in the Korith system, led by a species her forces had conquered only 2 years ago. It was the third uprising this month. "How do the humans control their people without constant rebellions?" she asked Kethran as they reviewed the reports. Her advisor looked puzzled. "They don't control them, Majesty. According to our intelligence, humans frequently disagree with their leaders and express their dissatisfaction openly. And yet they don't rebel? No, Majesty. They seem to have systems where they can change leaders without violence." This concept seemed impossible to Zarathul. In Veltar society, power was taken and held through strength. The idea that beings could willingly transfer power confused her greatly. She decided to ask Ambassador Chen about this paradox. "It's called democracy," he explained. "The idea is that power belongs to the people, and they choose who exercises it on their behalf. But how can the weak choose for the strong?" Chen smiled. "Who says they're weak? Physical strength isn't the only kind of power, Your Majesty. Some of our greatest leaders have been small in body, but giant in spirit." That afternoon, Zarathul made an unprecedented decision. She would accompany a small group to Earth, not as a conqueror, but as Chen's proposed cultural exchange. She would see this human society for herself. The journey to Earth gave her time to think. For the first time in decades, she wasn't planning a conquest or managing an empire. She was simply curious. The feeling was both unsettling and exhilarating. When their shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, Zarathul pressed her face to the viewing port like a youngling seeing space for the first time. The planet was beautiful in a way that her homeworld's crystalline perfection could never match. It was chaotic, organic, alive in every sense. They landed in what the humans called New York City. The moment Zarathul stepped from the shuttle, the sensory assault nearly overwhelmed her. Sounds, smells, sights, all blending together in a symphony of life. Her psychic senses, finely tuned to detect thoughts and emotions, were flooded with the mental emanations of millions of humans. But instead of the fear and despair she expected from a conquered people, she felt something else entirely. Hope, love, anger, joy, frustration, determination, the full spectrum of emotion flowing through the city like a living river. Ambassador Chen led her through the streets, pointing out various aspects of human society. She saw humans of different colors, speaking different languages, yet somehow functioning together. She saw art that served no practical purpose, but filled people with pleasure. She saw children playing games that had no winners, only joy. Most shocking of all, she saw humans caring for those who could give nothing back. Old humans too frail to work, young ones too small to contribute, sick ones who consumed resources without producing anything. In Veltar society, such individuals would be quietly disposed of as inefficient. "Why do you care for the weak?" she asked Chen as they watched a group of humans tending to the sick in what they called a hospital. "Because they're not weak," Chen replied. "They're us. Today I'm strong. Tomorrow I might need help. Today you need help. Tomorrow you might be strong enough to help others. Strength isn't just about what you can do alone." That evening, Chen took her to his home. Zarathul had expected a palace befitting someone of his importance. Instead, she found a simple dwelling filled with books, pictures, and the warm smell of cooking food. "This is my wife, Helen," Chen said as a smaller human female approached. "And my daughter, Lisa." Zarathul stared in amazement as the female human, Helen, showed no fear at meeting an alien queen. Instead, she smiled warmly and said, "Welcome to our home. David's told me so much about you." The daughter, barely reaching Zarathul's waist, looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Are you really from another planet? That's so cool. Can you show me your spaceship?" For the first time in centuries, Zarathul found herself laughing. The sound surprised her so much that she stopped abruptly, touching her throat in wonder. "Was that laughter?" she asked. "The beginning of it," Helen smiled. "Stay for dinner. Let's see if we can find the rest." As the evening progressed, Zarathul experienced something she had never known existed. A family meal where beings gathered not to discuss conquest or politics, but simply to enjoy each other's company. She watched in fascination as Chen and Helen debated some minor household issue, their voices raised but their expressions amused rather than angry. "Are you fighting?" she asked during a lull. "Arguing," Lisa corrected with the confidence only children possess. "It's different. When people fight, they want to hurt each other. When they argue, they're trying to figure out what's right." Such wisdom from such a small being amazed Zarathul. In her empire, disagreement was seen as disloyalty. Here, it seemed to be a natural part of relationship. That night, sleeping in the Chen family's guest room, Zarathul dreamed for the first time in decades. She dreamed of her own world, but instead of the cold crystal spires and silent efficiency of Veltar cities, she saw her people laughing, arguing, caring for each other the way humans did. She woke with tears on her face, another new experience. The moisture puzzled her until Helen explained that humans cried when feeling strong emotions, both sad and happy. "I think," Zarathul said quietly, "I am beginning to understand why you will never truly be conquered." The next 3 weeks on Earth challenged everything Zarathul thought she knew about civilization, power, and life itself. She saw humans overcome seemingly impossible challenges not through superior technology or psychic power, but through cooperation, creativity, and sheer refusal to give up. She witnessed a group of humans working together to save a building full of people from a fire, risking their own lives for strangers. She watched scientists share discoveries freely rather than hoarding them for advantage. She saw artists creating beauty for no other reason than the joy of creation. Most importantly, she began to understand love, not as weakness, but as a force that could inspire beings to achievements far beyond their individual capabilities. On her last day on Earth, Ambassador Chen took her to a place called the United Nations, where representatives from every human nation gathered to discuss problems and seek solutions. "This is how we govern ourselves," he explained as they watched delegates debate. "Not through conquest, but through consensus." "But it's so messy," Zarathul observed. "So inefficient." "Yes," Chen agreed. "But it's also honest. Everyone gets a voice, even if we don't like what they have to say." As her shuttle lifted off from Earth, Zarathul looked down at the blue-green world that had changed her forever. She thought of her empire, spread across 17 star systems, held together by fear and force. She thought of the rebellions, the constant need for more ships, more weapons, more control. Then she thought of Chen's family, arguing over dinner, but never doubting their love for each other. She thought of humans crying at both sadness and joy. She thought of laughter and the strange lightness it brought to her hearts. Somewhere during the journey back to her flagship, Queen Zarathul of the Veltar Empire made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She was going to learn to be happy, and she was going to teach her people to be happy too. But first, she had an empire to transform. The thought no longer filled her with the cold satisfaction of power. Instead, it filled her with something much more dangerous and wonderful: hope. The transformation of the Veltar Empire began slowly, like ripples spreading across still water. Queen Zarathul returned to her flagship with ideas that seemed impossible to her advisors, but she had seen the impossible work on Earth. She started with small changes that grew into something revolutionary. "I want to establish communication centers on every conquered world," she announced during her first council meeting after returning from Earth. "Places where the local populations can voice their concerns directly to our administrators." Kethran's crystalline skin shifted to deep purple, a sure sign of distress. "My queen, giving voice to our subjects will only encourage rebellion." "Will it?" Zarathul challenged. "Or will it prevent rebellion by addressing problems before they become uprisings?" She thought of the United Nations building, of humans arguing loudly but peacefully. Ambassador Chen had explained that when people felt heard, they were less likely to resort to violence. It was a concept that went against everything the Veltar had ever believed about control. The first communication center was established on Korath Prime, the world where the latest rebellion had occurred. Zarathul herself attended the opening, accompanied by Ambassador Chen, who had accepted her invitation to serve as an advisor on human methods of governance. The Korathans were a proud, feathered people who had fought fiercely against Veltar conquest. When Queen Zarathul entered their newly constructed communication center, the room fell silent with fear and tension. These beings expected punishment for their recent rebellion, not dialogue. "I have come to listen," Zarathul announced. Her 4 arms spread in a gesture of openness that she had learned from watching humans. "Speak, and I will hear." The first few hours were awkward. The Korathans spoke hesitantly, expecting tricks or traps. But as time passed and no punishments fell, their voices grew stronger. They spoke of families separated during the conquest, of cultural traditions that had been suppressed, of feeling like prisoners in their own cities. For the first time in her reign, Zarathul heard the true cost of her empire from those who had paid it. Their words cut deeper than any weapon. These were not abstract subjects to be managed, but living beings with hopes, fears, and dreams, just like humans. "Your children," she said to one Korathan father who had spoken of his younglings being forced into work camps. "Where are they now?" "Facility 7, Your Majesty. They learn to serve the Empire, but they forget how to be Korathan." That night, Zarathul visited Facility 7. What she found horrified her. Young Korathans sat in rows, memorizing Veltar protocols and speaking only in the Imperial language. The joy she had seen in human children was completely absent from their eyes. "This ends now," she declared to the facility administrator. "These children will return to their families immediately." "But Majesty," the administrator protested, "the indoctrination program is essential for integration." "Integration, not elimination," Zarathul corrected. "I want them to serve the Empire willingly, not because we've destroyed everything that makes them who they are." The changes continued to ripple outward. Zarathul established schools that taught both Veltar technology and local culture. She created programs where young Veltar could live with families from other species, learning about their ways of life. Most importantly, she began to include representatives from conquered worlds in her council meetings. Not everyone supported these changes. Many Veltar saw them as weakness, a dangerous departure from the strength that had built their empire. Admiral Thexvar, commander of the Third Fleet, was among the most vocal opponents. "You're destroying everything our people have worked for," he confronted Zarathul after a particularly heated council session. "The Empire is built on order and hierarchy. This chaos you're introducing will tear us apart." "Will it?" Zarathul asked. "Or will it make us stronger? Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time you felt joy in your service to the Empire?" The question clearly confused him. "Joy. I feel satisfaction in my duties, Majesty. But not joy. Not the happiness that comes from knowing your work brings good to others?" Admiral Thexvar couldn't answer because he had never considered such feelings relevant to military service. Like most Veltar, he had been taught that emotions were distractions from duty and efficiency. Zarathul decided to show, rather than tell. She arranged for Admiral Thexvar to accompany her on a visit to Earth, specifically to observe human military forces in action. The Admiral expected to see a weak, undisciplined force held together by sentiment rather than proper military structure. Instead, he found something that challenged all his assumptions about military effectiveness. Captain Morrison, who had become a liaison between human and Veltar forces, took them to observe a rescue operation. A passenger aircraft had crashed in the ocean, and both human and alien rescue teams were working together to save survivors. Admiral Thexvar watched in amazement as human soldiers risked their own lives repeatedly to save complete strangers. But what shocked him most was that they were smiling, even laughing, as they worked. Their efficiency was remarkable, but it came not from fear of punishment, but from genuine care for those they served. "They enjoy their work," he said in wonder. "They find meaning in it," Captain Morrison corrected. "When you know your actions matter, when you see the good they do, work becomes more than duty. It becomes purpose." After the rescue, Admiral Thexvar met with the human rescue team. These soldiers spoke freely with their officers, offered suggestions without fear, and showed a camaraderie that the Veltar military strictly discouraged. "In our service," one human sergeant explained, "we don't just follow orders blindly. We understand why we're doing what we're doing, and we believe it's right." That makes all the difference. That evening, Admiral Texvar sat with Queen Zarathul on the observation deck of their shuttle as Earth turned slowly below them. "I've served the Empire for 200 cycles," he said quietly. "I've conquered 12 worlds and commanded fleets that could destroy star systems. But today was the first time I felt proud of being a soldier." "Why?" Zarathul asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because today, I helped save lives instead of taking them. Today I saw what our strength could build instead of what it could destroy." The transformation of Admiral Texvar became a symbol for other Veltar military leaders. If someone so traditional could change, perhaps change was possible for everyone, but the real test came when a crisis struck the Empire. The Zephyrian Collective, a neighboring power that had long been wary of Veltar expansion, launched a surprise attack on 3 border worlds. The assault was brutal and coordinated, clearly intended to test whether the Empire's new weakness made it vulnerable. In the past, Zarathul would have responded with overwhelming force, crushing the Zephyrians so completely that no one would dare challenge the Empire again. But her time with humans had taught her that there might be other options. "We will defend our worlds," she announced to her council. "But our goal is not destruction. Our goal is peace." "Majesty," Kethran protested, "the Zephyrians have killed thousands of our people. They will see restraint as weakness." "Then we will show them a strength they don't understand," Zarathul replied. She deployed her fleets not just to repel the Zephyrian attack, but to protect civilian populations on both sides. Veltar medical ships treated wounded Zephyrians alongside their own people. When Zephyrian ships were disabled, Veltar forces offered rescue rather than destruction. Most shocking of all, when the Zephyrian flagship was crippled and drifting powerless, Queen Zarathul herself led the rescue mission to save the enemy crew. "Why?" asked Admiral Kethzar of the Zephyrian fleet as Veltar medics treated his wounds. "Why save us when we came to destroy you?" "Because," Zarathul said, "you are not our enemies. You are beings who fear what they don't understand. Once you understand us better, perhaps we can be something more." The Zephyrian admiral stared at her with confusion and dawning respect. "This is not how wars are fought." "No," Zarathul agreed. "This is how peace is built." Ambassador Chen, who had observed the entire conflict, approached her afterward with obvious pride in his expression. "You're beginning to understand what makes humans so stubborn," he said. "We don't just fight for what we want. We fight for what we believe is right." "And sometimes," Zarathul added, "the right thing is to refuse to fight at all." The Zephyrian conflict ended not with conquest or defeat, but with negotiation. For the first time in galactic history, the Veltar Empire had ended a war by making friends of their enemies. The Zephyrians, impressed by Veltar compassion and strength, agreed to a mutual defense pact instead of continued hostility. Word of this unprecedented resolution spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of Veltar expansion began to see them in a new light. Instead of avoiding contact, some began actively seeking it. But the most significant change came from within the Empire itself. On worlds throughout Veltar space, beings who had once lived in resigned acceptance began to hope. They saw their conquerors learning to be more than conquerors, and they dared to believe that they could be partners instead of subjects. The Korathans were among the first to respond to this new hope. The same people who had rebelled against Veltar rule now volunteered to serve in integrated fleets and administrative positions. Their natural warrior skills, combined with Veltar technology, created military units more effective than either species could field alone. Dr. Martinez, who had remained in the Empire to continue her research collaborations, documented these changes in her reports to Earth. "It's remarkable," she wrote. "The Veltar are discovering what humans learned long ago, that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. When beings with different strengths work together toward common goals, They achieved things none of them could accomplish alone. Queen Zarathul read these reports with growing amazement. The changes she had initiated were creating results beyond her wildest expectations. Her empire was becoming more powerful than ever, but not in ways she had anticipated. Instead of ruling through fear, she was leading through inspiration. Instead of extracting resources from conquered worlds, she was building partnerships that benefited everyone. Instead of maintaining order through force, she was creating harmony through understanding. But perhaps the most unexpected change was in herself. For the first time in centuries, Zarathul found herself looking forward to each day. The burden of ruling had become the joy of leading. The isolation of supreme power had given way to connections with beings throughout the galaxy. She thought often of her conversations with Ambassador Chen and his family. Their simple human wisdom had planted seeds that were now flowering into something beautiful and strange, a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. One evening, as she stood in her private garden, listening to the crystal plants sing their harmonic songs, Zarathul realized she was humming along. The sound surprised her so much that she stopped, then deliberately began again. Her voice, which had once issued commands that shook star systems, now carried simple music for no reason other than the joy of song. Kethron found her there, and his own crystalline skin reflected warm golden tones as he watched his queen discover happiness. "The changes suit you, Majesty," he said softly. "They suit all of us," Zarathul replied. "I think we forgot somewhere along the way that the purpose of power is not to prove we have it, but to use it to make life better for everyone." "Even for ourselves?" Zarathul smiled, an expression that had become much more common on her face. "Especially for ourselves. How can we give joy to others if we've never learned to feel it ourselves?" As she spoke these words, neither of them could know that an even greater change was coming. The transformation of the Veltar Empire was only the beginning. Soon, Queen Zarathul would discover that her encounters with humanity had changed her in ways that would affect not just her rule, but her very biology. The real revolution was about to begin. The discovery began with a routine medical examination that would change not just Queen Zarathul's life, but the future of two species forever. Dr. Velnara, the royal physician, had been concerned about subtle changes in the Queen's physiology since her return from Earth. The crystalline formations on Zarathul's skin had been shifting colors in patterns never before recorded. Her psychic emanations had become stronger, yet somehow gentler. Most puzzling of all, her cellular regeneration had accelerated dramatically. "Majesty," Dr. Velnara said carefully as she reviewed the latest test results, "I need to run additional scans. There are some anomalies that I cannot explain." Zarathul nodded absently. She was reviewing reports from the Andromedian system, where former enemy species were now working together on joint terraforming projects. The transformation of her empire continued to amaze her daily. "Of course, Doctor. Schedule whatever tests you need." But when the results came back 3 days later, Dr. Velnara's expression was one of complete bewilderment and growing excitement. "Majesty, I must ask you something in complete confidence. During your time on Earth, did you have any intimate contact with the humans?" The question struck Zarathul like a physical blow. She thought of Ambassador Chen, of the long conversations that had stretched late into Earth's nights. She thought of the moment when their hands had touched as he showed her a flowering plant in his garden. She thought of how natural it had felt, how right, despite the vast differences between their species. "Yes," she admitted quietly, "with Ambassador Chen. But surely that's impossible to detect." Dr. Velnara's skin shifted through a rainbow of colors, excitement, amazement, and a touch of fear. "Majesty, you are carrying a child." The words seemed to echo in the medical chamber. impossible and yet undeniably real. Zarathul sat down heavily, her mind reeling with implications. "That's genetically impossible," she whispered. "That's what I thought too," Dr. Velnera said. "But the scans are unmistakable. You are approximately 6 weeks pregnant with what appears to be a hybrid offspring. Human and Veltar genetic material have somehow combined in ways our science says should be impossible." Zarathul's 4 hands moved instinctively to her abdomen, where new life was growing against all biological laws. A child. David's child. Their child. "Have you informed anyone else of this?" she asked. "No one, Majesty." "I wanted your permission before proceeding. Keep this information sealed at the highest classification level. I need time to understand what this means." That night, Zarathul stood alone on her private balcony, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, was David, was the father of the impossible child growing within her, the child that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. She thought about what this meant for her empire, for her people, for the delicate new alliances she had been building. A hybrid child would be seen as an abomination by many Veltar traditionalists. Yet it might also represent something unprecedented, a living symbol of the cooperation between species that she had been trying to foster. But beyond the political implications, she felt something entirely new stirring in her hearts. Love for a being not yet born, fierce protective instincts that surprised her with their intensity, and a joy so profound it made her previous happiness seem pale by comparison. She called Ambassador Chen that very night, using the secure communication channel they had established for ongoing diplomatic discussions. "David," she said when his image appeared on the screen, "I need to see you. There's something we need to discuss in person." Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency, because Chen didn't ask questions. "I'll take the next available transport to your location." 3 days later, they met in her private garden, the place where their relationship had quietly evolved from diplomatic necessity to genuine connection. Chen arrived expecting to discuss some new development in interspecies relations. He was not prepared for what Zarathul told him. "That's impossible," he said after she finished explaining. "Humans and Veltar are too genetically different." "So our scientists believed," Zarathul agreed. "Yet here we are." Chen was quiet for a long time, processing the news. When he finally spoke, his voice carried wonder rather than fear. "A child. Our child. Are you pleased?" Zarathul asked, uncertain for perhaps the first time since becoming queen. "Pleased?" Chen stood and took her hands in his, marveling again at how perfectly they seemed to fit together despite their obvious differences. "Zara, this is a miracle. This child represents hope for something entirely new in the galaxy." Relief flooded through her, followed by a happiness so intense it manifested as a warm golden glow across her crystalline skin. "There will be complications," she warned. "Political, biological, social. Many of my people will see this as a betrayal of Veltar purity." "And many humans will struggle to accept it too," Chen acknowledged. "But maybe that's exactly why this is so important. Maybe this child will help both our species see beyond their prejudices." Dr. Velnara, brought into their confidence, began intensive study of the pregnancy's unique characteristics. What she discovered defied everything known about genetics and biology. "The child isn't simply a mixture of human and Veltar traits," she explained during one of their regular consultations. "Something new is happening at the cellular level, new genetic combinations that neither species has ever expressed." "What does that mean for the child's development?" Chen asked. "I honestly don't know. We're in completely uncharted territory, but the growth patterns are healthy by all measures we can apply." As weeks passed, the pregnancy began to affect Queen Zarathul in unexpected ways. Her psychic abilities grew stronger, but they also became more nuanced. Where once she had been able to sense emotions and thoughts as general patterns, Now she could perceive the subtle complexities of individual consciousness with remarkable clarity. More intriguingly, she began to sense something from the child itself. Not thoughts, exactly, but a presence that felt aware and responsive. Sometimes, when she was particularly stressed about political situations, she would feel a calming influence that seemed to emanate from the growing life within her. "I think," she told Chen during one of their private conversations, "our child is already trying to mediate between different perspectives." Chen laughed, a sound that never failed to warm Zarathul's hearts. "Diplomacy in the womb? That would be very human of him." "Him. Or her. I was just using the pronoun conventionally. Do Veltar have gender preferences for children?" The question made Zarathul pause. In Veltar society, offspring were valued primarily for their potential contributions to imperial strength. Personal preferences about gender were considered irrelevant. But now, thinking about their child, she realized she didn't care what gender the child might have. She only wanted them to be healthy and happy. "I want our child to be free to choose their own path," she said finally. "Whether that path leads to ruling an empire or growing flowers in a garden." Word of the pregnancy couldn't remain secret forever. The Queen's changing appearance and behavior were noticed by her staff, and eventually rumors began to circulate through the imperial court. Admiral Thexvar, now one of Zarathul's strongest supporters, was among the first to learn the truth officially. His reaction surprised everyone. "Congratulations, Majesty," he said simply. "The Empire will be honored to welcome the child." But not all reactions were so positive. Admiral Kothran, leader of the traditional faction within the Veltar military, demanded a private audience with the Queen. "This is an abomination," he declared without preamble. "You carry the offspring of an alien species. This violates every principle of Veltar superiority." Zarathul looked at him calmly, her 4 hands resting protectively over her growing child. "Does it? Or does it represent the ultimate expression of Veltar adaptability? Our ability to evolve beyond the limitations of our past?" "It represents contamination of the royal bloodline," Kothran insisted. "If this precedent is allowed to stand, what becomes of Veltar genetic purity?" "What has genetic purity ever given us except isolation?" Zarathul countered. "Look at what we've achieved through cooperation with other species. Look at how much stronger the Empire has become since we stopped insisting on our superiority and started recognizing the value of diversity." "The Council will never accept this," Kothran threatened. "Then perhaps it's time for a new council," Zarathul said quietly. The confrontation with Kothran forced Zarathul to accelerate plans she had been considering for months. She called a full assembly of the Imperial Council, including representatives from all member worlds, something that had never been done before. When the assembly convened, beings from dozens of species filled the great chamber. Humans sat beside Korathans, Veltar nobles shared space with former slaves, and in the center of it all, Queen Zarathul stood to address the future of the galaxy. "I have called this assembly to share news that will change our understanding of what it means to be part of this empire," she began. "I am carrying a child whose father is human ambassador David Chen." The chamber erupted in voices, some shocked, some pleased, some angry. Zarathul let the noise continue for several minutes before raising her hand for silence. "This child represents something unprecedented in galactic history. Not conquest of one species by another, but the willing union of 2 species in the service of something greater than either could achieve alone." Admiral Kothran stood. "Majesty, this violates every tradition of our people." "Yes," Zarathul agreed. "It does, and that's exactly why it matters." She gestured to the mixed assembly around them. "Look at what we have become since we abandoned the tradition of ruling through fear. Look at the prosperity, the peace. the innovation that has flourished when beings work together instead of against each other. Ambassador Chen stood as well. If I may speak, Your Majesty, this child will face challenges that neither pure human nor pure Veltar children face. But they will also have opportunities that no child has ever had before, to truly understand both species, to bridge differences that have kept the galaxy divided. Dr. Martinez, who had been invited as a scientific advisor, added her perspective. From a biological standpoint, this pregnancy suggests that the barriers between species may not be as absolute as we thought. If consciousness and compatibility can overcome genetic incompatibility, what does that say about the nature of life itself? The debate continued for hours, but gradually the tone shifted from opposition to curiosity. Representatives began asking practical questions about the child's future, their role in the empire, their rights and responsibilities. Young Lisa Chen, now grown into a thoughtful diplomat in her own right, posed perhaps the most important question of all. Will this child be considered human or Veltar? Neither, Zarathul said after a moment of thought. And both. This child will be something new entirely, a citizen of the galaxy rather than any single world or species. The phrase resonated through the chamber, a citizen of the galaxy. It captured something many beings had felt but never been able to articulate. The sense that their identities were expanding beyond the boundaries of their birth species. The assembly concluded with an unprecedented declaration. The Imperial Council, by unanimous vote, officially recognized the unborn child as the legitimate heir to the Veltar throne, while also granting them full human citizenship on Earth. More importantly, they established new legal frameworks for interspecies families and hybrid children. As the months passed, the pregnancy progressed normally despite its impossible nature. The child grew healthy and strong, their presence somehow enhancing rather than complicating Zarathul's abilities as a ruler. Reports arrived daily of new cooperative ventures between species. The Zephyrians had joined with Veltar engineers to design ships that combined the best features of both technologies. Former enemy species were collaborating on artistic projects that created beauty beyond anything either could achieve alone. Most remarkably, several other interspecies couples came forward, announcing their own relationships. What had begun as one impossible love story was inspiring others to look beyond the boundaries of their birth species. Dr. Z. Velnara monitored the pregnancy with fascination and growing excitement. The child's development continues to surprise me, she reported during the final months. Their brain structure shows characteristics of both species, but also completely new neural pathways that we've never observed before. What does that suggest? Chen asked. I think this child may possess abilities that neither humans nor Veltar have ever had. Enhanced empathy, intuitive understanding of complex systems, perhaps even new forms of consciousness we can't yet imagine. When labor finally began, beings across the galaxy waited for news. The birth took place in the Royal Medical Center, with both human and Veltar doctors attending. Ambassador Chen held Zarathul's hand throughout the process, marveling at the strength and courage she displayed. The child emerged healthy and perfect, with characteristics that clearly showed their dual heritage. Their skin held the faint crystalline patterns of the Veltar, but with the warmth and flexibility of human tissue. Their eyes combined the golden depth of their mother's with the warm brown of their father's. But most remarkable of all was their immediate awareness. From the moment of birth, the child seemed to perceive and respond to the emotions of everyone in the room. When they cried, it was not from distress, but from what seemed like overwhelming empathy for the complex feelings surrounding them. "Hello, little one," Zarathul whispered as she held her child for the first time. "Welcome to the galaxy." The child's eyes focused on her face with impossible clarity for a newborn. and she felt a wave of pure love and acceptance flow from the tiny being. In that moment, she knew that everything had changed forever. They named the child Kira El Chenthul, a name that combined elements from both human and Veltar traditions while creating something entirely new. News of the birth spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Celebration parties erupted on dozens of worlds, beings of all species gathering to toast the arrival of the first galactic citizen. But perhaps the most significant response came from the children. On world after world, young beings of different species began playing together in ways they never had before. The existence of Kira-El seemed to give them permission to see past the differences that had separated their parents. As Queen Zarathul looked down at her sleeping child, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a simple diplomatic meeting and a human ambassador's unexpected boldness. It had grown through shared conversations, mutual respect, and the gradual recognition that beings could be stronger together than apart. Now it had culminated in something that would reshape the galaxy itself, a child who belonged to no single species, but to all of them, a living symbol of what cooperation and love could achieve. "She's beautiful," Chen said softly, using the pronoun they had chosen for their daughter. "She's perfect," Zarathul agreed, "and she's going to change everything." Outside the medical center, beings from dozens of species celebrated together under alien stars. The Veltar Empire had evolved into something unprecedented, a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination, love rather than fear, hope rather than desperation. Queen Zarathul's world had indeed changed in an instant, the moment she first met a human delegation that refused to surrender. But the change hadn't ended there. It had grown and spread until it touched every corner of known space, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary force in the universe was not conquest or technology or power, but the simple recognition that all conscious beings deserved respect, understanding, and love. As she held her daughter close, Zarathul smiled at the thought of what adventures lay ahead. Kira-El would grow up in a galaxy where species differences were celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception, where the phrase impossible love had become simply love. The future had never looked brighter, and it all began with one human's refusal to bow before superior force, and one alien queen's willingness to learn that true strength came not from power over others, but from the courage to open one's heart to the infinite possibilities that existed when beings chose to stand together rather than apart. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.